Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the batch video for the web novel Thieves Dungeon from the website Royal Road. This video will contain chapters 2.21 to 2.24, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 2.21, Wayward Son. Ilbar struggled, burning pain searing up his arm. He was on his back, a giant star-nosed badger pinning him down and slowly rending him open with its claws, like he was soft mud being dug into. The beast had a freshly flower on the tip of his nose, and the raw pink flesh extending 5 whip-thin tendrils coiled around his arm, stringing him along with hundreds of poisonous barbs. Its long claws raked vicious lines in his belly and his calves. Again and again he stabbed it with his knife, his burning arm wrapping around his throat just to keep it from retreating back down into its den. Blood gouted across him, and his own and the badger's mixing and running down his hands. It was messy, brutal fight, and Ilbar won. He won by the barest of margins, by the fury that grew within him to the edge of death. The final hard sink of that knife into the neck severed the spinal column. It slumped atop him, and he let out a ragged, relieved sigh, shuddering with pain as he rolled his dead weight off of his aching body. From out of the badger's den a fox and his kits emerged. Each of them carried a small, limp bundle of white and black fur hanging from their jaws. Grunting, his fingers slipperily hoisted the badger up onto his back and slumped forward, bent under the damp furred weight. Ilbar could barely walk. His limbs rejected the very idea. Trembling, and the world swayed, his head slumped onto the end of his neck. If a predator happened by, but no, none did. Even if he trudged slowly back, fighting to keep one dizzy foot in front of the next as the uneven ground roots were crawled by. Almost falling down, he dropped the corpse and knelt himself by the glimmering coals of the last night's fire, scraping 2 fingers across the large, flat stone smeared with a lumpy paste that glowed blue. Healing plants were common here, but the fox mother had taught him and find them amongst the thorns and brambles. Applying it to the strips of rag that were left of his shredding of his clothing, he bandaged his wounds, feeling the fire sensation of magical healing spread over the lines of pain carved in his stomach. He soon would be able to learn to make linen out of the pants. His supply of bandages were almost out. Orcs scarred fast and hard. Over years, a warrior would build up a vicious plating of rigid tissue that protected him. In days, Ilbar was growing his own crop. They were faint tanned skin, lighter than the russet brown of his skin, and darker than the almost white of his underbelly. Tomorrow he would have a few more. Lying back, he let his eyes close. When he blinked awake again, it was night. 3 moons and a dark green floated ethereal above the canopy of the glass leaves, which was illuminated by the silver-green light, dripping with dew that fell from one crystalline leaf to the next with a resonating patter. He groaned, climbed up, and began to work on supper. The fire going out was an endless pain, forcing him to laboriously gather kindling, small sticks, and finally great rotten stubs of rock. The flame he coaxed from the flint, leaping out from above. The greenwood boughs, stripped of leaves and driven into the earth on either side of the campfire, had been split in their tops, providing a wide shape, and he hacked away chunks of badger meat and ran them through the fire-hardened spits, letting the skewers across the bow stands across the flames as it died down to a hot, low dance. When he turned around, 2 of the black-pawed little fox kits were staring at him, their noses lifted to catch the scent of rich, gamey flesh slowly browning, dripping out its juices in little drops that went sizzling into the fire. His body ached too much to play the usual chasing games, so he threw a stick, and then quickly snapped another branch of the third creeping towards the roasting meat. "Go on, get!" Ilbar shooed it away, claiming the meal for himself. His tusks bumped the skewer as he ripped away the shards of charred, pinking inside flesh. Half-cooked blood ran down his chin. It was heaven. It burnt to charcoal but stuck to his tongue and bitter crumbles of ash. If he'd been less exhausted, there were wild spices and herbs in the woods. The fox mother had given him lessons, nudging him towards the edible ones and letting him experience the less deadly poisons firsthand. Those days made for lessons that he would never forget. There was a shuffling in the underbrush, and he turned to see the glass golem returning, carrying an enormous head over its shoulders. It was the feathered scaled skull of some enormous predator. Like a toothed bird, her savage yellow eyes glazed over the swarming flies. It went into the pile and crown jewel on top of weeks of effort. The glass golem had woven a sled of vines and branches, piling it high with teeth, pieces of exoskeleton, and wilting flowers. Everything that the dungeon might want. Claw from the badger went to join the pile before they returned, as would parcels of choice plants the fox mother had led him to collect. It knelt by him, examining his wounds, pointing a glass finger at the sky. The golem made a turning motion with his hand and pointed at the sled. "Tomorrow. We're returning tomorrow." A nod. Hilba's heart beat with excitement. Over just half a month he'd grown stronger than ever. 2 weeks and his body was filled and lined with hard-won scars. If he would show the dungeon his worth, maybe it would honor his father still. Maybe he could convince it to free his people. "Tomorrow," he said, nodding. The word seemed to carry almost a magical power. Tomorrow. The next day they set out. The glass golem dragged the sled by the vine leads, and Ilbar scouted the way, watching for signs of danger. There were things in these woods even the glass fawn couldn't face. They were behemoths. Ilbar had heard them more than seen them, and the tyrant roars, the earth-shaking steps, rending the night apart. He'd learned to treat them with no more regard than passing storms, turning over to sleep and hugging the meager bedding tightly. In the morning the fawn would sometimes take him to see the aftermath, the trees reduced to splinters, the canopies torn apart, the light losing the strange blue complexion that it gained by passing through so many crystalline leaves. Vast footprints indented into the earth, pooling with the rainwater. And strangely there was life everywhere. In the fresh-turned mud, hundreds of green sprouts poked their heads out. From the stumps to the broken trees, new growth sprouted. The forest was unbreakable. Being considerably more fragile himself, Hilbar was cautiously scouting the way. Even beside the behemoths, there were creatures the fawn avoided rather than fought, and Hilbar searched the trees for their territorial signs, the earth for their footprints. Something stung against his neck. He slapped his hand down, expecting a gnat, but what came back from his fingers was a tiny arrow. Another sting, Hilbar yelped, scrambling over the roots and back towards the glass golem. An arrow stabbed into the back of his calf, and from the trees above hordes of little insect men were descending with buzzing wings and dragonfly mounts. In the distance he heard footsteps, large, trotting footsteps. Hilbar felt fuzzy. His vision was dissolving into many, many grains of colored sand, and they were buzzing about like little bees. Stinging little bees, he cried out in agony, and his feet tangled against the roots as he went down, stings digging into the back of his legs. It would have been uneasy to fall asleep and collapse right then and there. The darkness was waiting for him. It was on the edge of his vision already, creeping in on the distorted fuzzy static of the world. In the distance something roared. He fought his way up. He put on a foot in front of the other, although the needle arrows rained down from his back. A cold, smooth hand gripped his shoulder. Hilbar fell forward in the glass fawn's grip. A cold, wet nose nuzzled him into consciousness. Every ray of light was blobbed through the windows of his soul. Somewhere above him the glass golem was fighting desperately against an enormous lion with a mane of biting snakes. The serpents sprang gouts of black bile from their open mouths, melting the glass fawn's body as they landed. The beast swept its claws, threatening the golem's weakened flesh. The fox mother stood above him, a dead fairy clutched in her jaws. She prodded it at him, and then she only let out a weak grumble, slashed his cheek open with her claws. Hilbar, for the millionth time, lifted himself from the dirt and leaves of the forest floor. The whole body was sore. His eyes refused to see distant objects, only blurs of color. The golem was a spreading stain of green, and the lion a vast blot of gold. The sled! It was being pulled away by a swarm of fairies, straining together in a great flock of fluttering iridescent wings. Hilbar ran forward, seizing the vine ropes and giving him a hard whip-crack snake. Tiny bodies flew in all directions, and they were struck the earth. Hilbar brought his mud-stained boots stomping down over them. Shouldering the reins, he turned and began to run in opposite direction, towards the silver door. fighting to keep his legs underneath him as the tips of his toes tangled onto the shaking tree roots and slithering across the ground. The sled bumped and lurched behind him, spilling off treasures, and the fairies rallied. Pain slashed across his back and his legs as they made bombing runs, cutting at him with tiny sabers, the wounds burning hot with poison. He lifted his hands to shield his good eye. His arrows pelted his face, making his cheeks swell. Behind him there was a musical crash of glass breaking. He turned, eyes going wide, to see the glass fawn staggering back. Its right arm had been completely broken away. The sword stuck through the lion's left shoulder. Serpents coiled around the fawn's leg, trying to trip it up, trying to pull back down so the lion could rip it to pieces. In that moment, the glass column let out an ear-piercing, violent harmony, the crystalline noise on the very edge of perception that rose and rose in intensity. Elbar clutched his ears, diving to the ground. As above him the fairy raiders suddenly began to fall from the sky. Their balance simply left them as the note rang out, causing them to topple from their dragonfly mounts. The lion let out a confused, pained whimper, the serpents of the mane losing their coordination. With one slash of its swords, the glass column severed the legs free and vaulted away before the beast could recover. It ran past Elbar, and he rose and seized the vines of the sled again, pulling on. The poison was threatening to overwhelm him, making the world come apart into drifting particles of static. He fought though, his lungs burned, unable to suck in enough air as he desperately ran and ran and ran. Somewhere in the blind run, his whole body seemed to tighten with strain, on the verge of breaking. He heard a roar, not from the lion or from the distant behemoth. It was the sound of his father, boiling over with anger at the captors, a bloodlust in the veins burning in his eyes. But his father wasn't here. It was him. Somehow, with barely enough breath in his chest to keep him going, he was letting out a long, victorious howl. A last surge of strength took away his exhaustion. His legs flew across the ground without weight, and suddenly the air was different, cooler, and full of deep and comforting damp of the underground. The bitter taste of stone, the loamy scent of fungal forest. His feet met hard rock instead of soft soil. It left him topple forward, exhausted, as last his vision blurred on confused nothing. He was home. Home? When had it become home? End of chapter. Chapter 2.22 Tribute. The glass fawn spilled through the portal of the everlast forest, missing an arm and covered in black bile. It turned back, and for a single moment I saw what looked like concern in the language of its body as it stared through the silver doorway. Then Elbar crashed through as well, pulling with him a sled that overturned and spilled furs and trinkets of bone. Tiny arrows bristled from the backs of the arms and spines of a porcupine. Rats swarmed across him, and they were here in the dozens, in the hundreds. Ardent had called them, and they had answered. Now they sniffed curiously at the orc, the groaning pile of blubber. Kobachan bent over, lifting up the boy over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, and carrying him towards the glass gazebo. The golem bowed to me and followed. That left the rats. Argent scrambled atop the severed head of an enormous, beautiful monstrosity, bright red ridges of feathers running across its scaly, armored skin. Its mouth was open in a permanent predatory smile, teeth like knives. The rats gathered beneath her in teeming swarms, and there was a hidden city built atop my dungeon. In the long tunnels that led upwards towards Walder's Cafe, rats built their dens into the walls, carving out countless burrows and caverns by their gnawing, and the rats tended to secret forests, planting the fungi spore from our own gardens, taking root in the rich soil to feed the thriving metropolis of sprawled into the unsound multitudes. Stone-tusked rats and Goliaths among their people, wallflowers clever and intricate in their thinking, bright-claw rats fierce as always, and web-weavers, shunned and feared by their strange ways. It was no longer fair to call them merely a part of my own dungeon. They were a legion unto themselves, loyal to Argent and thus me. But as for what happened in those miniature cities, even I could barely keep track of a fraction. But when Argent called, they came, a swarm, a plague, an army, waiting for their command. I have challenge for them, and the honor of second only to Argent's. She conveyed my words to them. I've created from the common rat a warrior. My ratfolk loomed above them. His paws he held a crude spear carved of fungal shoots, and a dense, wacky chitin fire hardened formal point. Of you, all the dungeon-born rats have a chance to become more, to fight for your queen and your people. I will grant this prize to 3 rats, those 3 that bring me the most beautiful objects. I give you 1 week. For those not born of the dungeon, another challenge and another prize. To those 3 who bring me the most useful information, I'll grant the bounty of strength and cunning. Now go. My words dispersed them, and the sea of ratty bodies and whiskered faces lifted up towards Argent and her high perch breathing at once. Breaking into the chaos, they scrambled and fought one another to be the first into the tunnels, to lead the way up into the waking world where they would find their prizes. I started as Stampede. Perhaps, and only a spare secret entrance from the being discovered. Perhaps I should have warned Volder about this. I turned my attention briefly towards the gazebo, where the boy lay recuperating. It seemed he would live, and better yet, the glass column had accumulated enough mana to evolve. Both concerns for later. For now, Goba-chan, I have a task for you too. Yes, Maker, he replied, lifting the gaze into the air where he imagined I resided. I could sense the eagerness to serve, the want for my attention. Through his voice alone, though, without looking into his mind. We must build a hunting grounds. It'll stand above the breach and challenge the humans. It'll be done, he answered. And with that, I was free to indulge myself. The glass column had returned with the bounty, and I wouldn't let a single present go to waste. I was going to enjoy this. The first appetizer was the tooth of an enormous jungle cat that hunted by way of numerous eyes patterned on its brilliant orange pelt. Every eye was capable of magical sight, making it a supreme observer. Next, a horned rabbit that bore the innate ability of illusions, a 6-armed monkey with 6 eyes, grey eels with electrified bodies that swam through the air like ribbons of storm cloud. I ate and ate. The Everforest was home to thousands of species, and on my plate were fragments and shells of pale spiders that spun musical webs to lure love-struck birds who believed that they were answering a mate's call. The petals of parasitic plants that seized its victims as puppet defenders. But the prize of the feast was the enormous head of the terror bird, its flesh dense with mana. Full-grown, the specimen must have been the size of a house. By the time I had finished dissolving the tributes into flames of the purest mana, I had overflowed, and the world went white, and I felt satisfied. You have created the Lantern of the Merchant. A dungeon trader is being summoned towards your domain. Please wait. That night, the soldiers guarding the breach saw something that would haunt their nightmares. Enormous spiders hauled themselves out of the rift, their carapaces made of rough grey stone, their legs covered in coarse black hairs. The eyes regarded the men in their shining armor, and ignored them. The spiders spread outwards, the guard steadily falling back to enter the district that they had been damaged by the earthquake that tore the dungeon open. Now the spiders ripped down the fallen houses, pushed away the rubble. The people camped in the ruins had no choice but to flee as the insatiable stone monsters advanced. From their spinnerets they wove threads of black granite. The chief of the guard fled back to inform the Governor Calden, who the new Lord Protector. By the time the two arrived, the sumptuous carriage, it was too late. The dome had already begun to form, and those at the base had cleared the district. The spiders were weaving a new construction, lifting it higher and higher. By mid-morning the walls were 2 stories high. The people gathered to see, sitting and watching the 8-legged horrors crawling along the edges, weaving thread after thread in silvery material that hardened into the black stone. The braver picked up a fallen bricks and hurled them at the Goliath spiders. They bounced off, ineffective. By noon, the walls were beginning to curve inward to meet, and the half the city's army stood arrayed around the dome's great edge, just in case the spiders grew hungry. In the end, it took 5 days to finish the vast dome, just 5 days to replace 2-acre-wide chunk of the city with a black, ominous dome, and for all those 5 days, the people of Colton would glance towards the edges of the rising monolith, see the 8-legged shadows crawling here and there, and shudder. This merchant was taking their own sweet time to arrive. I had almost completed my preparations for the hunting grounds by the time the spiders finished. Gobichan was leading them, and I would leave it to him to determine all the small details, the flourishing touches that would be needed if I were to live up to my standards. I simply took care of the creatures. To start with, I created a base of a mycelium colony, a ball of tightly clustered roots fed on dense manna and bred to expand rapidly, bringing green life to the hunting grounds. To augment it, I created several more spore hearts of differing species, born from my own tribute from the Everforest. The beasts of the hunting grounds would be simple predators, but with an artistic touch. I started with the birds, flightless and the size of a man. They strode on long, clawed feet, their bodies covered in a shocking plumes of orange, while their short arms and spread feathers of mottled black and white. Their heads were skeletal, white and reptilian, with staring eyes deep stains of black. Heavy claws of the color of obsidian were meant for seizing prey, while vicious kicks and bites would bring down a foe. Pack hunters, they would serve as the front line of the hunting grounds. To accompany them, I combined a few of their other traits with common crows caught in my spider's webs over the weeks. In specific, I took the crow's basic shape and made it bigger, much bigger, with the clawed wings and deadly talons of a terror bird. I even added a blade-like protrusion at the beak, making it a chopping edge like an axe. What I kept was the capacity for flight, least in short bursts, and the unique vocal cords. They would be able to mimic human speech. And speaking of mimicking humans, my final addition to the hunting grounds were based on the 6-armed monkeys with 8 eyes, now to go with the 8 limbs. I gave them a spider's regenerative powers, augmented to the extreme to let them come back from even vicious wounds. Able to wield crude spears and hurl rocks, they would serve as an excellent harassing force. In short, I had no intention of making this easy. Feathered terror. With excellent coordination within their packs, these deadly predators from another time can take down foes many times their size. Their fearsome plumage shines in the undergrowth of the jungle. Axe-beak corvid. With mocking voices and fierce intellect, the axe-beaks hunt from above, descending to finish off stragglers and the unwary. 8-limbed howler. A hideous mix of ape and arachnid, the 8-limbed howler cries disturb the peace of the jungle, and they roam in great congregations in the branches, harassing the invaders below. That was when I heard clapping, and found the merchant had already arrived in my dungeon, sitting on a rock, smoking a long-bone pipe. Ghosts and phantasms curled in the streams of smoke. He had a rough shape of a human, but a head with the striped fur of a tiger, and wore multiple layers of robes, yellow silk and dark hides, with dangling hands and threaded seashells and teeth hanging across his chest. His hands bent backwards, making the act of clapping rather difficult to do. Excellent, excellent! You and I will be able to do business together, without a doubt. You have the senses of an artiste, my newfound friend. End of chapter. Chapter 2.23 Destination. Every time Tina came to Kaltern, the city made less sense to her. The color of the noise grew more chaotic, the streets filthier, the nobles in the high palanquins more decked out in gold. Beggars swarmed the outer gates like flies, unable to pay to be let in. And if they did get any coin, they'd be spent on the gate fee, only to be kicked out for begging inside within a week. There was something sick and dependent about the city, something self-consuming. That was why Tina didn't trust it. She carried a bundle of silver doe skins over her shoulders, and toothed pendant swaying from her neck as she bent. It was a lucky charms, and in the wild skill was enough. But for the streets of Kaltern, you needed luck. The gate fee had gone up, the market was so crowded, so full of human noise and stink, that Tina could barely think. Her mind came to her and left her in sudden waves, washing away the clamour of the marketplace and creeping back to the rare moments of quiet. She thought that she'd been short-changed by the merchant once she got free of the confusion. She thought that she had found a way to live without Kaltern next year. The sight of the city swarmed over in waves, like the lashing of strange, colourful sea. And before she knew it, she was washed up onto the steps of her favourite place in the whole city, a quiet little temple of the Owl Prophetess. Owls peeped and hooted when eaves, statues, and forgotten saints abandoned in the original temples accumulated here, and here accumulated owls on the shoulders of the heads, congregations of snowy, barn, desert, and horned, owls from the other world over. The prophetess herself was sweeping the stoop clean, humming a little song. My lady Styx, Tiana, underneath the yelled beak of her painted wooden mask, the oracle's face lit up, and she rushed down to squeeze the, much taller woman into a tight hug. I thought you'd be here tomorrow. I saw the last sparrow of autumn perched on my hut, and I thought there's no sense in putting things off. I better go to Coltern. Sparrows? She exclaimed with a laugh. That explains it. I can never account for them. Did you dream about me? Tyna asked. She had came here every time she visited the city for supplies, to ask about the migrations of animals and the yearly harvest. But this was the first time Strix had expected her. I went looking for one, Strix said. There was something odd in her expression. Tyna, I have something to ask you. Anything, my lady? Strix reached down into her many pockets and handed her stitched robes and brought up a silver token on a leather cord. There is a dungeon under Coltern, I've heard. How could she miss the rumors? The gossip, the street oracles proclaiming doom. The whole city was looking over its shoulders to rising at the Black Dome. This is a token to hunt there. You can take 4 others with you. Strix let out a sigh, pushing the back of her hand through the smooth dark hair. I need you to go there and make what choices you will make. Can't you even tell me what you want? Tyna was confused. She trusted the little prophetess, yes, but she was a hunter and a trapper, a merchant of skins and teeth, not someone known for wisdom. No, because you're the strongest person I know, and one of the most sensible. You'll see what you need to. I am too close to this, she paused, and in a very small voice said, The dungeon claimed the life of someone dear to me. Tiana paused and nodded. Where do I find my 4 others? The Nameless Cafe. The city of Coltern was getting stranger by the day. As the prophetess Strix had left her temple, the little building by the main road where the elves clustered on the thatch on the roof had perched on moss-linged crags of stained statues. The procession walked by, and they wore chainmail of sorts, pieced together from coins with strings through the middle, clanking and swaying about their otherwise nude bodies as they walked through the streets. They carried many-tailed whips, and one by one they would shout, Repent! And strike themselves on their bare backs. She waited a respectful distance, her little snow owl perched on her shoulder to see by, and pretended to be blind when one of them broke out of the parade to shove a hat under her nose. It was an easy thing to pretend. Her eyes were clouded colour of the storm of the sea. Walking along the dusty roads, she came to a place where the old man sat in an overturned barrel, telling stories to children and glancing to their parents with a crooked smile in hopes of coin. Cathane the archer was distraught, his story went, for if he didn't turn himself over to be executed, the giants would kill his family instead. Praying for guidance, he went to the cairn, and the ancestors shot even 7 arrows into the sky, asking the wind spirits to lead him. Not an arrow came down. He waited, and at last he resigned himself. He would surrender to the giants. He saw his family just once, his wife clutching his hand through the bars of the cell. She fled with the wild places and the high wind-snarled mountains, taking his 2 children with. And their story is a myth on its own. That day he was led from the cell to the king of the giants, who gloated mightily, and asked where he would like to die. Answered Cathane, on the cairn on my ancestors. The giants, seeming no reason to refuse them, led their hated enemy to the moss-tumbled hill. The king of giants himself lifted the executioner's axe, and Cathane was knelt across the butcher's block. In that moment the wind finally let go of Cathane's first arrow. It fell to pierce through the giant king's one enormous eye, and then he howled in the dark. Cathane slipped away, running like a rabbit into the great forest. One by one the arrows came down, guiding him away from the clever traps of the elves and spiders, which the giant blundered into. The spirits of the wind guided him to the cave of Umber, but as for what he found inside, my throat is dry, the old grey-beard declared, clapping his book of stories shut. Perhaps if someone had lent me a copper penny for an ale. Anyone? No. His expression was an epitome of hope, but quickly lost its luster as he realized none where the fish were biting. The parents took their children away, and he flicked his hand in the remaining street brats, shooing them off. Oh, pooh, no ale, no stories, and them's the rules. Across the street from him, Strix found an empty box and crumpled up top of it, lifting her hands wide into the air and beginning to proclaim nonsense phrases like a street prophet. The man's expression dipped a notch lower in despondency. Street prophecy, that's where all the coin was. Climbing off his perch, he grumbled to himself. The old storyteller made his way to greener pastures. Maybe the cafe that he'd heard so much about. Adventurers were always loose with copper penny. So he hoped. Henry was just strolling through the settling evening of Carlton, taking in the sights, feeling the streets beneath his worn-down boots, his head engrossed in the stars just beginning to gleam through the darkened sky. He walked directly into the small girl carrying a glass fizzing drink. It splashed across his tunic and he startled backwards. "Oh!" they both said simultaneously. To his horror, she was blind. "Oh, my God's sight! I'm so clumsy of me." Hurrying to pat her on the head, he winced. Just his luck. "Let me go get you another. Just hold on." Henry paused, realizing this was in the middle of the street, and he probably shouldn't give a blind girl standing here. "Right here." Taking her by the shoulder, he steered her to the side. All the time, not a peep out of the girl, just a confused, blank-eyed stare. Henry pitied her. Without his eyes, what else would he be? Confused most of the time, probably. Leaving her there for a moment, he headed inside the bustling little shop. The smell of fresh pastries and something sweet that he couldn't quite place surrounding him. And Strix smiled. Tina was unsure of what she was doing here, surrounded by the bustle of people. By the sounds of their conversation, she was like a frightened rabbit. The silver token hung from her neck as an approach to the countertop. The man was leaning over the counter, gesturing wildly, a cleft twist in his lip, and his brow loomed prominently. "I'm telling you, Volder, I can do this. I almost made it through the 3rd level, and look!" He thrust out a golden locket, a tiny saint set of archway of garnet. "Mur," the sandy blonde-haired twig of a boy behind the counter said, "it's too dangerous. You don't know what's down there." They spoke over one another, a confused font of words. Tierna shook her head like they were flies. "Are you okay?" A cute young woman with frizzy brown locks was staring at her. "Do you need to sit down?" "I need a drink." She threw a handful of small coins on the counter, from which the girl diligently picked the precise change and shoved the rest back. "Something strong, then," the young girl said definitively. She moved with the great machine of the cafe center, the gleaming pillar of brass and its winding inorganic viscera of pipes that rattled nozzles. It let out a great belch of steam and frothing milk liqueur, filling the slender glass to the brim. By the time she turned around, Tierna had been caught. The cleft-faced man had seen the silver token hanging from her neck. "Mur, Nola Mur, at your service. I can't help but wonder if you're looking for companions to brave the hunting grounds with. I know a little spellcraft myself." He eagerly pressed, holding out his hand. She reluctantly took it, grasping a single finger between two of hers, and giving him a smallest of shakes. "Excuse me," smiling at her was a man with a large head and an odd baldness where his hair used to be, a light peach fuzz covering his scalp. "If you're looking for allies, could I present myself? Henry. Just Henry. God's help her. It could have been one of her nightmares." End of chapter. Chapter 2.24 New Horizons. Cobachan had been given a charge. An oblong egg of dark blue, larger than his skull. Once born, the creature that gestated within would quickly become big to climb out of the dungeon's narrow staircase, and would be trapped in the lower layer. So it would have to be this way. He would watch over the innocent guardian of the 0th floor until it was ready to stand on its own. Over the past weeks, his work had become almost frantic. In a zealous, studious slowness, he would take the lumps of clouded quartz brought to him by the stone-tusked rats, be it soft honey color or common or to the earth here, or the rarest soft pink of rose, or even the true prizes, the rutile quartzes, with their needles of false gold cutting through the pale white. With his oils and his tools, he would carefully slice away what was unfit, exposing the beauty within the stone, faceting them until their clouds of imperfection were gone, and a sparkling core, fit into the contained manner, remained. Dozens of finished pieces, the largest as long as his pointing finger, waited in his study. He handled them with a religious care, lifting them into his long spear, the light descending from the ever lamp and turning them so that the light sparkled against every facet. All these because he knew they must impress the maker. That he was to show his value. The love of the stones themselves was eclipsed by his desire to prove himself in the only field the maker truly valued. Beauty. A grand project was forming in his mind. The dome of the hunting grounds was grim, lightless. Huge towers of black stone rose, holding up the ceiling, their tops branching so that they seemed like petrified trees. Kobachan's own suggestion to the dim leader of the stone spinners. They lurched behind him in a steady line, carrying the fungal cores that would bring life to the desolate place. Kobachan instructed them in a planting, watching as the feelers of the mycelium, like silver hairs, crawling outwards towards the fleshy hearts, and the vein network a patch of fine white snow spreading over the black as the first core unfolded. From it grew tiny, thin shoots of glass, curling up their tops and to hide their tiny bulbs glowing with an eerie green. Waves of spiral shoots soon spread out across the floor, providing a thick grass of fruiting bodies. Taller stalks rose slowly, putting out a corkscrew pattern in the thin fungal shells, each turning slightly red at the ruffled edges to add a splash of color against the gloomy sea of the waving emerald feelers below. This was the core born from the somnolent blooms, their pollen diluted to provide a constant haze rather than an explosive burst of poison. The next to surface had its roots deeper underground, twisting in mazes beneath the churning dirt and the remains of the cobblestone streets. Up from the earth pushed enormous lopsided cups of red, the underbellies gilded with scallopy lines of purple. They were joined by grey, tiered mushrooms like a strange organic pagodas, one flat and wrinkled cap after another expanding, the roots climbing the stone pillars as false trees, spreading bubbling pink flecked robes of white, the mutant offsprings of the bursting bloom, to be tending to the enormous variants of the cultivator ants. Soon, the open, gloomy space beneath the dome had been replaced by a vibrant jungle, a sea of emerald in which a pale white mushroom flesh took on a poison gleam, and the soft pinks of the bloody cups and the blooming stalks went dark as red. With the rounded, organic shapes, it seemed almost like the inside of some vast beast, some behemoth. Kobachan saw potential as he laid the egg of the nest of the woven mushroom grasses. Yes, he could work with this. Reaching out, he called to his power. It was weak, too weak to be compared with the dungeon's, but it was his, and it grew day by day, allowing him the tiniest of strength to shape the world. Slowly, a flame of mana congealed within his palm, and he whispered rune words to it, fed it with the murmured dreams. All his mind was given to a single thought, a visualization of a butterfly, and slowly the fire condensed inwards into the four-winged shape. But not any butterfly. The creature that loomed in the blue smoke of the flame that emanated from its palm was as tall as a man. The petite scales of the wings were panels of luminous blue and bottle green, and the striations of midnight purple. And from its abdomen descended two long trails. Each was threaded with the colorless razor-sharp hairs, arrayed in long-bladed fans. The glimmering of the color of steel, the butterfly with the whip-thin sword tendrils. He smiled and collapsed inwards, forming flesh, forming his first creation. Blade Butterfly. With the beautiful wings and deadly trails, the beast has an ambush predator, hypnotizing with glory of its body and swiftly taking lives. It'll carry its prey into the heights to slowly rot, drinking the corpse once it is fermented to mush. Golden dust rained down from the wings as it took flight. Rising from him into the sky, it brought a faint smile to the arachne's frigid, often cruel face. He drew deeper into the little flame that lived in his chest, drawing it forth until the fingers began to tremble. Still too weak, still too small, but this much he could do. Clouding deposits of rust red and emerald green appeared on the trunks of the vast stone trees. Real, petrified forests would be glimmering, alive with the light reflected on the mineral incrustations forced out of the bark as the wood turned to stone. He made it so. At his will, one of the trees cracked open, revealing a geode heart of clouded blue. The humans would flock to steal the glittering treasures exposed. Weakness came over him suddenly, and his legs nearly failed out. The human body swung forward, sweat dripping from its brows, darkness washing over him in waves. He spent a long time in the in-between place of the lion of consciousness, chasing the feeling of power that had come over him, and in an instant before he collapsed, the ability to shape life out of mana. What a thing it was! It was too precious to waste. Slowly lifting himself, he turned towards the ceiling. Although life twined its way up the pillars, the sky was still lifeless and a dull black, save for the fluttering colors of his butterflies. It would not do. I must say, not many dungeons have your taste. The newcomer looked at his pipe and backwards, bending his hand and puffed out a cloud of scintillating blue smoke. A ghostly woman formed within the strange corkscrew of azure dancing. He stood on the edge of the final island, facing the edges, letting the illusion of the silver tree beak reform and turn to examine the different angles, which is the whole nature of our predicament. He tapped the ash from the pipe, dripping droplets of grey landing on the clear waters of the globuled by the brides of heaven. I had relocated the wondrous fish here, where they would be safer. You see, not many dungeons would care for your creations. Beautiful, yes, but not. The tiger snapped his claw fingers. Here, let me show you. Opening up the outermost of his robes, he drew out a crystal of the purest white, cracked through the veins of blue. This wonderful thing draws spirits and discount ghosts. A soul bauble. You see how much a thing could be useful to a dungeon. His way of talking was never properly to stop, but let the end of each sentence stir and stretch him to a purr. It made him almost a hypnotizing orator, with his lazy tiger drawl curling up each syllable as into a satisfied musical note. I could have listened to it for hours. Oh, here, look here. Again, from his cloak, it seemed to have a different pocket and different treasures each time he opened it up. He drew a thin vial corked with a silver top. Something like a golden oil sparkled within. Accumulated life manners fit to evolve any creature they touch. Better yet, I can sell you a flower that produces them endlessly, a fountain of adaptations and mutations. Frost traced the surface of the still pool, spelling outwards towards the gentle floats of iron. Do you have a way to restore a broken attunements? Broken attunements? Yes, but a faint smile placed across his lips. The tiger smile could never really be called gentle. Expensive. He blew a gate of smoke into the air and stepped through, vanishing, and when he reappeared, it was atop a large painted wagon, drawn by two goats, pure white and pure black. Marvellos, read the great sign on the side, with its sky-blue swirls and the smoke of red lettering. Leaping down, he patted the bleating beauties and stepped up, opening up to reveal the menagerie within. From elephants with tusks made of the purest skygrist to what looked like a grey-scaled virums, they were all shrunken to the size of mice, caged with tiny dangling prisoners of gold. He took one by the chain and dangled it from and held it for my inspection. A golden stag. From the moment I saw it, I knew I had to have it. My world turned on my ability to know my own that beautiful creature, to possess it, to drink its blood, to make myself whole. The god-side beast, fit to grant flesh, attunement to replace the lost. More my troubles I cannot take mana, nor for a price like this I require. He made it sound like the most reasonable thing in the world. Payment in kind. Deal? I could almost have fallen for his glamours if I hadn't recently been waylaid by the corruption's intoxication madness. Instead, made the mana around him writhe in anger, until he squirmed uncomfortably and released the spell with a laugh. Instantly, he seemed far less impressive. His fur was shabby and threadbare, patches fallen away entirely, his eyes lined with grey slime, his robes were tatty and stitched together. Damn! He cursed and laughed again. But the deal you'll find is very fair. I merely want your fabulous snake. Oh yes, a prize beast he is, and no. I made the wind roar the word, tossing back his layers of robes and making his pendants jingle as his own words were thrown back at him, lost in the all-consuming howl. No. It echoed out from every direction. Commencing, he bent himself in bow. Very well, no need to get snippish. Leaping onto his wagon, he cracked the reins, relighting the pipe in an outburst of wicked coals to nothing. In 1 month I will return, if you have anything worth trading. With that snide remark, he puffed a smoke gate and drove through it. Gone. Good riddance. It was only afterwards that I noticed a rum writhing in dismay, searching high and low. At first I mistook him, trying to console him, promising him with waves of affection that I would never... But he already knew that. No, something was missing. I was short one kobold. End of chapter. And that concludes this batch video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so down below. Until next time, I hope that you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.